Good evening, friends, colleagues, commissioners. Call tonight's February 21st, 2019 meeting of the City of Santa Barbara Harbor Commissioners to order. Ms. Galarte, would you call roll, please?
Bill Splicer.
Here.
Jim Sloan.
Here.
Betsy Kramer.
Here.
Lang Sly.
Here.
John Stedman.
Here.
Shoham Yaniv.
Here.
And Merritt McRae is absent.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Reedman, any changes to tonight's agenda?
Mr. Chair, no changes tonight.
Okay, very good. This is our public comment time. I think we'll dispense with that this evening. We'll move to the approval of the minutes. Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
Did you get that? First and second.
First and second. Okay.
Before we get started, I've just been reminded to make sure, commissioners, when you address, please turn your microphones on so that the television video people can get everything on record. All in favor of approval of the minutes, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any abstentions, any nays? Very good, it passes unanimously. With that, Mr. Reedman, Director's Report.
Sure. Good evening, Commissioners. Mr. Chair, as I reported the last couple of months, actually, we've had a bit of turnover at the Waterfront Department, but we're starting to fill up some of those holes. Karina Arroyo took over as the Waterfront Accounting Assistant. She came to us from City Finance Department, where she did billing, accounts payable, and accounts receivable, which is just exactly what we need. She's familiar with the city systems and has done the payroll and all of that. Before that, she worked at Parks and Rec for a while. So we welcome Karina to the staff, and that's helping our other accountant a lot. Also, as I reported previously, the administrative analyst position at the waterfront has remained vacant for 3 months or so. The department opened outside recruitment, open recruitment for the administrative analysts on November 12th. Because of the way the holidays and the City Hall holiday closure happened, it took us all this time to get together and vet the applicants and so forth. We had over 50 applications received, and after a series of panel interviews, Christopher Bell was offered the position and accepted. Chris has worked at the city for over 20 years, and way back when, I think before that 20 years, he worked a stint at the Waterfront Department, actually. So it just seems like he's uniquely prepared to assume the position. He's downstairs right now filming it as we speak. So he's by osmosis. He understands our budget, how we do business, and most of what we do. So I think he'll be able to hit the ground running, and he brings up some interesting talents and skills to the position. So, and he starts on March 4th. He has to finish up the project, and then he'll begin on March 4th. The Waterfront Department still has one opening for a Harbor Patrol officer. I believe we're accepting applications until the position gets filled, and I also believe we have one or two in the application phase, going through the checks and so forth. Is it one or two?
We're interviewing 3 tomorrow.
Oh, okay, even better. On February 13th, the department held a publicly noticed budget subcommittee meeting of the Harbor Commission, consisting of Commissioners Kramer, Sloan, and Sly. And staff reviewed the mid-year budget report, including a brief overview of revenues and as of mid-year and revenue projections as of year end. Commissioners were interested in the decline in pedestrian visitors to the wharf over the past 4 consecutive years, and asked perhaps if Visit Santa Barbara could possibly offer some sort of solution for that, because it's kind of counterintuitive with all the construction we've had. The car counts are up, but the pedestrians are down. So I'm just kind of mystified, Brian and myself here. No members of the public attended the meeting. And tentative agenda items for the March meeting would be the recommended budget and also harbor slip electrical submetering and billing. I'm going to open that up for discussion. And that concludes my report unless there are any questions.
Is that yours, Betsy? Excuse us. Thank you, Mr. Reedman. Any questions?
Did they say the budget subcommittee, or did Visit Santa Barbara say when they'll get back to the subcommittee with an answer or anything pertaining to the car counts? Or?
It was just our suggestion.
Oh,
that maybe-
suggestion, okay.
Yeah, so, I think to summarize, if I have my numbers correct, Brian, we had tens of thousands of visitors down, pedestrian, 40 or 50,000, sliding down the last 4 years. But we had an increase in cars, but if you put 4 people in each car, it only made up 5 or 10,000 of that back. And so it wasn't an offsetting number. And so the discussion came up as to why is that? And since we have a group like Visit Santa Barbara that monitors all sorts of reasons and helps us out, why don't we ask them if they could maybe help us understand it and maybe help look into it, because they know how to do it better than we do. So that was kind of...
Commissioner Stedman.
Yes, I have a quick question. Scott, on this opening for Harbor Patrol Officer,
Yes.
is that because we're one under our normal account, or is that in anticipation of retirement?
No, that's an existing position that's just vacant. We don't anticipate any retirements right at the moment.
Got it. Understood.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Reedman. Facilities Management Report, Mr. Treiberg.
Good evening, Chair Spicer and Commissioners. Tonight I'll be reporting on our annual Stearns Wharf pile driving contract. Just by way of a little bit of a background, I'd like to review the Stearns Wharf structure itself. There are piles, different types of piles driven into the seafloor, what we call pile caps. On top of those, these are stringers, and then deck boards, and on top of the deck boards there's roadway and buildings and other things. So whenever I talk about the structure in the annual project, it's related to this, what we call heavy timber, that really comprises the structure of the facility itself. Overall, there's 158 vents. Those are rows of piles. There's 2,309 piles, lengths of caps 7,900 linear feet, 40,000 linear feet of stringers, and 4 acres of deck boards. There's a lot of wood. There's a forest out there all supporting Stearns Wharf. We have 4 pile types. Wood, the primary pile type is wood, and that's what our annual pile driving contract focuses on. We have splice piles, and these are under buildings where we can't drive new piles or install what we call fiberglass wrapped piles. This is a technique we started probably close to 10 years ago that we're using more and more of, as the piles beneath the buildings that we really can't get to begin to deteriorate. We can wrap them with fiberglass and really restore the life expectancy of those considerably. And we have steel piles under Moby Dick's restaurant and the Sea Center. Those are both areas that burned in 1998 for Moby Dick's, and 2002, I believe, for the Sea Center. And when those were redesigned, it was decided to go ahead and drive steel piles. Much easier to maintain, and certainly much better under buildings where you kind of can't maintain piles very well. Every year we inspect 500 piles. There's 1,500 total, so it's a 3-year rotation. We have a P3 objective that you hear about in the budget to make sure we get to at least 500 every year. This year we went from the beach, vent 26, out to vent 72, which is the Y, where the wharf splits. And we found quite a bit of damage to surf zone piles this year. This year's contract includes 35 wooden piles. Only 25 feet of cap, but that tends to increase significantly once you start peeling the deck off. You wind up finding more things to replace. 20 stringers and 1,500 square feet of deck boards. We have an annual objective of at least 3,000 square feet of deck boards, and that seems to keep most of the deck in pretty decent shape. This is the location of the piles. So bent 30, it's a little hard to see, but the beach is just at about bent 26 at a relatively low tide and up to about bent 23 at a higher tide. So we get a lot of surf zone waves actually breaking here. If anybody's been out in a big swell, you'll see waves break right here and really start to feel the bottom at the Y. It's pretty interesting to be in the Harbor Restaurant or any of the restaurants, frankly, when there's a large swell. So this is a fairly indicative of some of the damage we've had recently. As a matter of fact, this year has been a pretty rough year. And in addition to the piles I noted, we've probably got at least 3 or 4 more piles, several of which are right here, that got knocked out already. We don't see that very often. We went out to bid, had our regular 2 contractors submit bids. Cushman, a local reputable contractor, submitted a low bid of $150,000. They're going to start work next week. They're going to start the mobilization. Most of the work is in the roadway, as I noted, and in order to keep the wharf open, we do night work. So we notify all the adjacent residents and hotels, letting them know it's going to be disruptive. We try to do it as quickly as possible, but it can take, probably 4 to 8 weeks, kind of depending on how efficient they can be. They'll do whatever day work they can. Over here, this is the valet parking lot, so that'll all be done in the day, which kind of helps. But there's no choice but to work during the night, otherwise we'd have to close the wharf and all the businesses. This project is included in our capital improvement program every year. The funding's gone up gradually over the years. We're up to $425,000 per year at this time. We procure all the materials. We like to have an inventory on hand over and above what we think will go in the contract, adequate to replace about 3 or 5 roadway bents. So what that means is, if we had several of these bents wash out in a big storm, we would have the material on hand to go out and replace it right away so we could minimize any downtime. And this can happen. It doesn't happen very often. We try to stay ahead of it, but we think that's kind of a prudent way to manage the wharf and maintain our inventory. The bottom line is the waterfront's most vulnerable and valuable facility is Stearns Wharf. We invest a lot of money and time on it. And fortunately, it's been in pretty good shape. Our staff does a good job and look forward to getting this project started and completed as quickly as possible. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Triberg? Commissioner Sloan.
Yeah, Carl, so when they do the survey and they found those 35 piles that need replacing, do they kind of rank order the amount of damage where some's minimal and some are just completely taken out? And if so, how many of those fall into the severe category, would you say?
Chair Spicer, Commissioner Sloan, we have an evaluation that's been prepared and upgraded over the years. I just got an upgrade that's done by an engineering firm called Moffitt & Nickel. So they come up with criteria and guidelines for replacement. With the piles themselves, it's really a percentage of the pile that's still intact. These are 14-inch piles, 14-inch diameter, and as it narrows or pencils, it becomes either moderate, severe, or major damage. Major damage gets replaced.
Okay.
Severe, we can kind of wait on. It also has to do with the spacing of the piles. For the load rating that's adequate for getting firefighting apparatus out there, we try to keep them at least 8 feet apart. So you may have 3 piles within 8 feet. If the middle one's bad, just take it out and off you go.
Right.
In general, we're trying to have the spacing narrower than 8 feet to the extent that we can. So we follow those guidelines, and that really dictates what we take out and what we replace. So in general, those 35, they've got to go in order to meet our load rating guidelines.
So they would be in the severe category?
Yes, that's
And
correct.
is that like 50% of the diameter, or what is the criteria? Do you
Well,
remember?
it probably, I can't remember exactly, but probably close to 50%. So,
Yeah.
if it pencils a little bit, it's
Right.
still got a lot of load-bearing ability. But I don't remember exactly. But it is
Yeah.
based on the percentage of good wood.
Yeah. And then when you do it, does the density of the seafloor change out there? And is one area easier to put them in than others?
Yes, yes and no. When we get into the shallower areas, especially if there's less water, it's more difficult to get deep penetration. Obviously, when there's water there, you actually kind of liquefy the sand as you drive the pile. So some of these ones that are just up from the beach or on the beach, it's going to be tough to get more than about 10 feet in the ground. Further out where it's a little bit softer, you could probably get over 20, 25 feet.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. So it varies. The pile driving hammer is big and it's strong, and it really smashes those things in there.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? I just had a quick one. Can you estimate night work? Does that mean starting at 6 o'clock, or does that mean start at 8 p.m.? Can you just give me an estimate of what the night work time frame is?
Chair Spicer, it's from 11 a.m. to about 7 a.m., so after the restaurants close and try to get cars back on the wharf by the time Moby Dick's opens for breakfast.
11 p.m.
11 p.m. to
Gotcha.
7 a.m., yes.
Gotcha. Perfect. Thank you. Appreciate the report. We are at item number 4, new business. Emily, will you fill us in, please?
Yes. The invasive Asian kelp, Undaria pinnata in Southern California. Recommendation that the Harbor Commission receive a report from Dr. Lindsay Marks, Resource Protection Specialist with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary regarding invasive Asian kelp.
Okay. Welcome. Are we ready to go? Please. Oh. Try now.
Okay. Good evening, Chairman Spicer and Commissioners. Thank you very much for having us. My name is Lindsay Marks, and I'm here with Sean Hastings, who's the Resource Protection Coordinator for the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary as well. So we are very happy to be here tonight to speak to you about the invasive Undaria pinnata fida. It's in Southern California, and it's spreading here locally in our regional waters. And I would like to give you a fairly brief presentation about the state of this invasive algae in our area, and really invite a conversation and hear your questions and thoughts about what can or should be done about the situation. Excuse me. So just to tell you a little bit about the background of this invasive algae, it's from Asia, and it's also called, a common name is wakame. It can be found in miso soup. It's commonly eaten in Asia. It has an annual life cycle where it has this vegetative large blade, which is what we can see with the naked eye. It gets to about 3 feet long, and as it matures, after it reproduces, it dies. These reproductive gametes that it lets out are what allows the next generation to reproduce, but these are microscopic gametes that can lay dormant for up to 3 years. So sometimes you'll see these really dense patches of Undaria, like on the left here. Even if you don't see it, it may just be in this dormant phase at a different time of year. It's been in our local harbors in Southern California since the early 2000s, and it's been in the Santa Barbara Harbor, I believe, since looks like 2000. And it's really been relegated to the harbors for most of that time, except for one population at Catalina Island in a protected cove there called Button Shell Cove. But other than that, we've really seen no incursions on the open coast until 2016, when it was found off the coast of Anacapa Island. It's thought that it's moved from harbor to harbor and out to the open coast by boats. This vegetative stage, which you can see sort of on the left side here, is not buoyant, and so if it comes off, it's not likely to drift very far, and the reproductive spores are not likely to drift particularly far on their own. And so most likely we're seeing new populations come about as they're attaching to boats, to hulls, and to propellers and materials like this. just going to show you a little bit of information from the Santa Barbara Harbor here. As I mentioned, it's been here since about 2000. And Dr. Carrie Culver is a researcher at UC Santa Barbara who's been monitoring Undaria locally here for a number of years. And you don't have to pay too much attention to the differences in colors here. What they really represent is the different sampling periods over the last several years. And what we can see is in the orange here, and we're looking at kind of a culmination of slips where Undaria has been found consistently in multiple surveys, and in red, all of the surveys that have been done in the last several years here from 2006, 2013, and 2014, just sort of opportunistically. And what I'm really trying to point out here is that there are certain hot spots in the harbor. It's really not necessarily distributed evenly. And in the red there, kind of towards the right side of Marina 1, towards the mouth, the harbor mouth, is sort of the hottest spot. And when Sean and I went out last fall, we did kind of a dock walk to just sort of see what we could see from the docks. And we actually, we saw, again, the most plants in that same area. And if we look now at the rest of the marina, Carrie has found more consistent populations kind of out again towards the harbor mouth around Marina 4. And Sean and I, this is awkward, sorry. Sean and I found the same thing when we were out there as well. The most plants we found were on Marina 4 as well as over on the sea landing area. And so it's really the most... this is good news in the sense that it's not the entire harbor where this is found, that there are these certain areas that we may be able to focus our efforts. And really the most bang you can get for your buck with invasive species is to focus on preventing reintroduction and spread via these potential vectors. To be able to do that, there are a couple of things we need to do. We need to know where these species are, and so one way to do that is monitoring. The National Park Service is the group who found the wild population at Anacapa Island. They do regular annual monitoring out on the open coast, but it's really important to have more eyes in the water and more people looking for this. So we have a citizen science campaign to try to get local boaters and divers to be keeping their eye out for this species and reporting it when they find it. We've also been experimenting. Mick gave us permission last week to test this ROV that the Sea Center has. They use it for education and outreach purposes, and we wondered if we might be able to use it to sort of look around in the harbor for Undaria populations as well. Turned out to be rather challenging, but a lot of fun to try. There are some research projects that are developing to try also to get a better sense of what the vectors really are, and again to sort of be able to target efforts to control and limit the spread. This is a project that we've been working on with the researchers at UCLA to try to use genetics to identify which local harbor the Anacapa population may have come from. We don't know if that's possible, but we've collected samples from some of the local harbors as well as out at Anacapa Island, and we'll see if they're able to tell which harbor it came from. We've also been working on some outreach to try to educate people about this issue and again help us get a better handle on where the species is. This is on the right-hand side a flyer that we developed to use in harbors to just help people become aware of this invasive seaweed as well as another one, Sargassum horneri. And we've also, the sanctuary also published a report kind of documenting a menu of management options that may be available and of interest to folks in the area to, again, try to control further spread of the species. And I included that, I think, in the packet that was sent out to all of you. Finally, there are some potential options for control. This is something that's been attempted in the past, even in Santa Barbara Harbor. I know that there have been some past efforts to remove this seaweed. the problem with removing it just in this vegetative phase is that there are still this dormant microscopic stages that are really difficult to see or kill, or you really can't remove them manually. So there are some newer technologies coming out testing ways to treat spaces with heat or UV light to try to kill all of those different life stages of the invasive algae. And so I think this has potential to be much more successful, but is all sort of in development now. So with that, I'd love to just invite your questions and thoughts about what, you know, how you see this issue, how you see the harbor as a potential partner in dealing with it. We're also really at the most basic level, again, trying to get an understanding of what types of surfaces it grows on. Is it really, how commonly is it on the boats in the harbor? Is there a pattern? Is it more transient boats that it's growing on? Or is it really just in these sort of targeted areas, these hot spots? So we'd be very interested in your thoughts on all of that.
Thank you very much. And Commissioner Kramer.
Yeah, thank you very, very much for this report. It's fascinating. It brought up a lot of questions to me, sort of basic one. I think it would be helpful to those listening to explain why this is a problem.
Yes. In this area, we don't know that it is. It's been invasive elsewhere in the world. Certain areas like in New Zealand, in Argentina, it's become the most dominant kelp on some reefs there. It's certainly context dependent, right? In our area, we've even, like, it's been at the Catalina Island for a number of years and it hasn't spread out of that area. And so it's really just hard to predict what's going to happen ecologically. So I'm not saying that we need to necessarily, you know, we're not trying to go out and eradicate it from the open coast, but it's really more a question of preventing future introductions to really just try to maintain the native biodiversity that we have in the area and do what we can to not be introducing things that don't belong here.
Yeah. And at what point does an invasive species become basically a native species?
Yeah, so the term is naturalized. It's sort of where it's determined that it's not going to have any negative ecological or economic impacts. It's really a case-by-case basis. There's no real definition for that. There are certain non-native species, like there's another sargassum species, Sargassum muticum, that's in the area that's relatively rare. It's highly invasive further up north, up the coast. In colder waters, it does much better, but down here, it's fairly rare. And so I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah,
it's
somewhat, yeah. Right.
Sort of in the eye of the beholder. Yeah.
So more of a philosophical question,
Yeah.
I guess, yeah. And has any been seen at the sanctuary off Gaviota area?
Of this species?
Yes.
Or in the sanctuary? I'm sorry.
The Undaria, or whatever it is.
Of Undaria, it's only been found at Anacapa Island.
But also in this harbor, so it hasn't been...
Also in the harbor. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Yes, it's been found in all of the harbors from Monterey down to Mexico. But on the open coast, offshore of that, and it hasn't been found anywhere on the mainland here, outside of the harbors.
Right. Okay.
Or any of the other islands
I'll
yet.
let other people ask, and so I've got a question.
Any other questions?
Yeah, a couple of questions. First of all, did it get brought over via ocean, waves and currents, or via boats and ships? How did it make its way over here?
In the first place, that's a good question. It's hard to know. I don't think it drifted naturally. Like I said, it's negatively buoyant, and so it can't really drift very far on currents. So it most likely was growing on a hull or propeller of more of an ocean-going ship that crossed over. It could also have been growing on like oyster cultures, on the shells of other things that were being imported.
Yeah. Second question, you said that heat or the UV light can kill it or can neutralize it. How does kind of the warming water temperatures and things like that, does that also negatively affect it as well, or would that increase the growth of wakame or the seaweed or kelp. Sorry.
Yeah, good question. I'm sorry, I'm not used to addressing the commission. Good, thank you.
That's fine.
Commissioner Yanet. Yes, certain algae grow better in certain temperature envelopes. And so where it's from in Asia, it has a kind of a similar temperature envelope to Southern California here. The fact that it can do well all the way up in Monterey and all the way down to Mexico indicates that it has a fairly wide bandwidth for changes in water temperature. Certainly warmer water, during the period of warmer water that we had in the last few years, that's when we saw this expansion out to the island. So that sort of suggests that it prefers this slightly warmer conditions. But yeah, at some point, warm water is not good for all brown algae.
Sure.
We've seen a major loss in native giant kelp in the last couple of years because it's been too warm. So at some point, that may affect Glandaria as well.
And lastly, can kelp ever become too invasive that it takes over a marine ecosystem and kill off the fish and other animals?
Right. Yeah, that is the concern, is that if something becomes sort of like a monoculture, if it becomes so abundant that it's outcompeting the native species, yes, it can negatively impact those other algae as well as, like you said, the fish and other creatures that rely on them.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Sly.
I think I read something in the report saying that although more study is needed, that this was not necessarily thought to be competitive with our native kelp or California kelp or whatever it is. Sure. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, well, we don't have evidence of that yet. It's been pretty recently found out on the open coast here. But yes, it does have several life history features that make us think it's not necessarily going to become really dominant out here. It has this annual life cycle where every year it dies back, and so that gives other species an opportunity that have a more, it's called perennial regeneration from, they reproduce multiple times, they live multiple years, gives those species an ability to, and a chance to recolonize that space. So in our environment here, it may not become dominant. It may become common enough to have some impact and outcompete some other species, but I don't anticipate it will become the new giant kelp. Yeah.
I had a quick question. Are you comfortable speculating as to why those particular marinas might be more affected than others here in our marina?
Yeah. Thanks, Chairman Spicer. Yes, I think that it's most likely that there's a lot more flow. You all know a lot more about the harbor flow dynamics than I do, but the fact that in both marinas and at Sea Landing, it's nearer to the harbor mouth, I would think that there's more flow, more nutrients coming in and out. I think it's probably better for the growth of algae in general. I don't know if you agree with that. Yeah.
Jim.
I have another theory on that. That's where the big boats are, and they travel a lot farther than some of the smaller. That's what struck me when you first put that up. In Marina 1, on the far end, that's the bigger slips, and so the bigger boats are out there, and so they travel a little farther, longer range than the smaller boats farther in. And then down on that one inside was where all the fishing boats were, and they also travel quite a bit to the fishing ground. So just another theory to go along to why.
Yeah.
So when was the first time this was seen in California?
In California, 2000, in Long Beach Harbor.
And was that because that's the first time we looked for it, or was that because it was the first time it was seen?
It's a good question. There were some semi-regular surveys that were happening before that.
Okay.
I believe, I don't know who the first person to find it was, but other invasive algae have been found by environmental consultants doing surveys in harbors.
But they weren't specifically looking for.
They weren't specifically.
You don't look for something you don't know is there, right?
That's true. That's true. It certainly could have been present earlier, but I do think the fact that how rapidly it showed up in the same year or next year in the other harbors, I would be surprised. It indicates to me that it was probably recently actually introduced.
Yeah, okay. Is it, did it show up in LA Harbor first?
Los
Where
Angeles
the container
Harbor.
traffic is? Mm-hmm. So we think it came over on container ships? I
Most
mean, that's a
likely.
hypothesis, obviously.
Yes.
And since it sinks, negatively buoyant, you mentioned, is most of it, we think, brought up by anchors? Is that?
That's possible.
Because you showed it on the growing on the hull of a boat, but if it's negatively buoyant, how did it get up there? Unless that boat was on the bottom for some reason.
That's a good point. I think that probably the spores were recruit really well onto artificial substrates, and they are so light, they're incredibly tiny, that they mix into the water column and can settle throughout the water column. So it's, even though the vegetative reproductive plants sink to the bottom, they can still release those gametes, and those can then be flushed through the water column in the harbor, I think. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
Commissioner Kramer.
In terms of Commissioner Sloan's comment about the boats going further, I noticed the same pattern seemed to be on the Monterey Harbor, that it was concentrated on the far end also. I don't know what's in the Monterey Harbor besides that. I was wondering what you would be suggesting for the city of Santa Barbara to do, or what you're asking of the Harbor Commission or so forth, and related to that, what other area marinas are doing. What's Morro Bay doing, for instance, or what's Ventura doing? And
yeah, thank you, Commissioner Kramer, for that question. I'm not aware of any real concerted effort in other harbors to be working on it. There was, like I mentioned, some experimentation several years ago in several harbors, including Monterey and here, with removal that was largely unsuccessful. I think what we're asking now is, I don't think we any longer have the unrealistic expectation of eradication from harbors. I think now we're trying to come up with ways to limit further spread and reintroduction. And so really we're welcoming your thoughts and your ideas and your partnership in trying to realize how to do that. And so that really is going to involve some research and understanding of like learning more where in the harbors, what type of substrates, trying to figure out what the potential vectors are, what types of boats are really potentially some place to target our efforts to have some impact. And then, essentially supporting the work. Another thought is with these couple of treatment methods I've mentioned, the hot water, the UV, I think it's really promising, but it requires experimentation. And so if you have ideas or interest in supporting that kind of work in the harbor, testing it on some pilings or some materials that you have, helping us come up with ways where we could explore that further, that would be fantastic. Helping us come up with some ideas for, or even implementing the outreach that we've developed, or helping us improve that to figure out how to be reaching folks, how to improve monitoring, maybe tapping into folks that have eyes in the water, like the hull cleaners, like dock walkers, helping us understand how we can be more effective in our outreach and communication as well.
that to me sounds like a really all those good ideas, but it's not really something that we can do. It's something that they can work with. And
Mr. Chair, if I might.
Please, Mr. Crum.
So relative to our role, we've been it's been quite a while, but we were initially involved in the preliminary Undaria removal projects back in, I think it was 2001, something like that. And we had, actually, I helped organize cadres of volunteers to come down and pull it out. The spirit was there, but I think we were kind of operating in the blind. The science wasn't nearly as sophisticated as it is now relative to the life cycle of this vegetation. And so we realized, we were overwhelmed, and the next step was to call in the Marines if you wanted to get rid of it in Santa Barbara Harbor. And similarly, at the same time, Monterey was doing an eradication effort, which Dr. Marks can comment, I believe, was ultimately not successful either. Our role at this time is we're here to help NOAA do whatever scientific investigation they need to do relative to this invasive plant. And as long as it's done, and we've coordinated, Dr. Marks and I communicate all the time also with Carl and Sean, when they, like the ROV, we just wanted to make sure boating safety, was maintained. And then when it comes to heat and some of these alternative treatments, heat and light and all of that, we look forward to working with NOAA on that. We trust them when it comes to, we're not going to irradiate, all the opali on the harbor, but the rest of it is safety and security and outreach, and that would be our role, and we're here to support their efforts.
Thank you. Thank you. And Commissioner Sloan.
So a couple of ideas I had on that. One is, every year we do a cleanup of the bottom of the marina. And the problem with the marina is the visibility is really poor. So it isn't like the divers are down there and they can look around and see all this stuff. But, it might be worth educating some of the divers as to what to look for. And if they're down there and they happen to see it, it might help the monitoring. The other idea is that is looking at the anti-fouling paint, see if it will attack this and do it. Because I know that right now there's a lot of work being done to get rid of the coppers and some of the other metals and anti-fouling paint. And I don't know if the manufacturers are aware of this at all, but it might be worth talking to some of the paint manufacturers about whether it will address this or not. And so that would be one way to address part of it, because if it is coming up on someone's anchor somewhere and getting onto their hull, if the anti-fouling paint does attack it like it attacks a lot of the other stuff, it might be worthwhile. So just some ideas.
Thanks, Commissioner Sloan. That's a great suggestion. I had the same thought and concern because I've been hearing about more and more concern about the copper paint being problematic, and harbors starting to ask or cut down on how that contamination. And so I did wonder if that was going to increase this issue of fouling of invasive species. So it is a good and important question, yeah.
I have a question. Have there been any companies out there that have done any research into real-world application of the Asian kelp besides a food source? Or it could be used for anything else? Or what's the makeup of it? Or I don't know if you can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, thanks.
Shampoo. Right.
Well, seaweed is a common ingredient in cosmetics, and so it is harvested for that in some places in Asia, certainly. It's also used as fertilizer. And in Hawaii, there's a major invasive algae issue there as well, and there are some major removal efforts happening in Kaneohe Bay, and every day that they come back with these bags and bags full of algae, farmers will come down and pick it up because it's really nutritious, great fertilizer for their crops. So there are uses. The question, I think, becomes what is the volume and consistency of what you can produce, and so I think it takes a little thought to figure out how you can create a viable and sustainable use, but certainly worth exploring.
Sure. I know there is a company out or a boat out here. I think it's called the Ocean Harvester, that they go and they collect the seaweed. I don't know that much about it, but do they work with you guys at all in terms of doing any eradication or looking for it, or?
We haven't talked to them about that yet. I do believe that the kelp harvester is what you're talking about, right? Yeah. So they have the ability to harvest kelp from a boat. It's sort of like mowing the lawn.
Yeah.
They just are taking the surface canopy, and this is a little challenging because it doesn't reach the surface, and so to do removals effectively, it really requires divers. And then, as we're arguing, follow up with these other treatments.
Yeah.
So it's a bit more labor intensive and kind of a different structure.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Commissioner Kramer.
It seems to me that the recommendations for the Santa Barbara region on page 4 are really right to the point. I mean, and I found the section on the quagga mussels also persuasive as to educating people and inspecting boats. But I don't know if there's extra funding in the waterfront department to, in fact, do that. But the cooperation sounds encouraging that Mr. Conman mentions.
Thank you.
That's right.
I think you can find by the interest here that we do support it. I'm not quite sure it's a funding issue, but we do support it, absolutely, and we appreciate the staff's willingness to work with you. And I personally appreciate everything that Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary and the scientists do, so I think that's great. If we don't have any other questions, I just wanted to offer my sincere thank you for giving us this presentation. And then also, if inappropriate, if there's any follow-up, we'd be most interested in that as well.
Fantastic.
All right,
Thank you
well,
very much,
thank
Chair
you.
Spicer. Thank you, Commissioners.
Well, thank you. Good, thank you. Yeah, something like that. I want to make sure they have phone at the top for the presentation. 'Cause that's a very- We'll just hold on a second. Thank you, Dr. Marks. Don't forget your bottle. Okay, we are on to item number 5. Emily, will you update us on that?
Sure. Fiscal year 2019 mid-year budget report. Recommendation that the Harbor Commission receive and review a status report on the Waterfront Department fiscal year 2019 mid-year budget revenues and expenditures.
Very good. Mr. Bossi, is this you?
This is me. Good evening, Commissioners. I have a very brief mid-year budget report to present to the Harbor Commission. We did talk about this last week with the Harbor Commission Budget Subcommittee, and this is one of 2 budget reports tonight, and we've separated them because you really have to have 2 different thought processes going on. So this first one is our mid-year budget report, and this is our finances through December 31st of 2018. So you're going to have to place yourself back a couple of months because the next one we move forward and we're looking into the future. So as far as we are looking healthy financially down at the Waterfront Department, on the left of this chart, you'll see our 4 revenue categories: property management, financial management, parking services, and marina management. Next column is our budget. The next column is the year to date. That's through that December 31st, 2018. And then we use some seasonally weighted averages and project out to where we think we'll end the fiscal year. And then next is the variance and our year-end variance, both in dollars as well as percentage. And so at the end of the year, we're looking to come in, we're looking to meet budget and exceed it by about 1.7%. Overall, property management is looking to be pretty much right on budget. It's a little low. It's kind of a mishmash out there right now. We've got some, our Harbor and Wharf commercial are trending up. Our restaurants are just trending a little down. So we're hoping that we'll come in even above budget. But of course, the last couple weeks with the weather hasn't helped too much. Again, these are our slow months, so it didn't impact us too much, but we're hoping to come out of that. Financial management, we're looking to come in a little under budget again, but we're always hopeful that that'll change. But these are numbers that are provided, the financial side, from our finance department. Our parking services, we have 7 of our 10 lots at the end of December are above where they were last year. The 3 lots that are lagging are our Cabrillo East and Cabrillo West. As you know, about 40% of those lots is taken up by the Cabrillo Pavilion project, due to be complete here in the coming months. So even despite those 2 being down, we also have Garden Street down. That's primarily due to the fact that most of the construction on Lower State Street is done, so a lot of those daytime workers who were paying on a daily basis are now gone, so it's kind of settling back to normal. And then our marina management continues to post strong numbers. That's primarily based on, the big thing there is our slip permit transfer fees. As of December 31st, we had 40 transfers to the tune of just under $700,000. So those are our revenue projections. Our expenditures at mid-year, there's a lot of information here, but down on the far right, you'll see we're at 54%, a little above 54% halfway through the year. going through them, I think a few of the highlights or things that pop out are total salaries and benefits are a bit below. As Scott mentioned in his director's report, we've been out without a few positions for a number of months, so that has helped those salaries come in below where they're supposed to be. But we're hopeful. That's one thing we really want to hit because that means we're fully staffed and fully operating. If you work your way down a little bit, our principal and interest are higher than the 50%, as you can see. And that's because those are front-weighted towards the early part of the year. I believe principal is due at the end of August, and then a big interest payment is due in October. So those are kind of front-weighted, but they'll even out over the year. So big picture, our revenues are still coming in strong, even despite the weather. That we'll see how that plays out. And then our expenditures we anticipate that they'll come in below what we have budgeted. So Scott likes to mention that driving that wedge forward as far as higher revenues, lower expenditures, and we're looking to do that again this year. So I'm happy to answer any questions you might have regarding the mid-year budget.
Any questions for Mr. Bossy? Commissioner Sloan.
On the salaries and benefits being at 45%, now that we have some of the positions filled, do you anticipate the second half of the year being at 50% or above?
Well, we're still, Chair Spicer, Commissioner Sloan, we're still a little off. So we still don't have a Harbor Patrol supervisor, but that might even out with, we've had to pay Harbor Patrol overtime because, they're filling in for that position. But the other positions are coming in at likely a lower rate than their predecessors, who were probably topped out, left, and then so we'll come in below.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I noticed that that's the first time in a number of years that we've used weather in a negative aspect. It's always been part of the driver of the parking revenue being so high. So in the big picture, I guess that's good, but interesting. Thank you, Mr. Bossy. Item 6. Emily, will you fill us in?
Yes. Proposed lease agreement with Mariansky and Turner. Recommendation that the Harbor Commission review and recommend City Council approval of the 3-year lease agreement with Alexandra Mariansky and Jonathan Turner at an average initial base rent of $464.35 per month for an approximately 167 square feet of the second floor office space designated at 125 Harbor Way, Suite 21.
Mr. Bossy, please.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. Alexandra Mariansky and Jonathan Turner are professors at the University of California at Riverside. They've been tenants at 125 Harbor Way, number 21, since March of 2011. They were selected as tenants after a competitive request for proposal process. This is one of our office spaces on the second floor of the building. Very small offices can be somewhat tough to fill, but these folks are, as I said, professors at UCR, and they use the office as a field station for researching Chumash maritime culture, and they work with both UCSB as well as Santa Barbara City College. Their lease terms, they have a 3-year term, and that is at their request. They are anticipating wrapping up all of their research within that 3 years, and so likely at that time, unless they need more, we'll go into a request for proposal process. The base rent, as Emily noted, is just shy of $465. They do have an annual rent adjustment, a cost of living increase based on the consumer price index, and the permitted use of is a business office. They are tenants in good standing, and they are prompt with their rental payments, and they have no lease compliance issues on file. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any of your questions you might have regarding the proposed office lease.
Any questions for Mr. Bossy on this?
I'd move to approve.
In that case, I'll ask for a motion. Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
There's a first and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions? Any nays? Passes unanimously. Terrific. Item number 7, Municipal Code. Emily, can you, when you get a moment?
Municipal Code Amendments. Recommendation that the Harbor Commission receive a report on proposed amendments to Title 17 of the Santa Barbara Municipal Code and recommend adoptions of those amendments to City Council.
Mr. Croman, please.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, good evening. By way of background on this, as you may recall, we come to you annually after reviewing Title 17, which is the harbor of the municipal code, in order to maintain proper legal framework for basically everything we do, our policies, our programs, and all that we need to have protected in a legal framework. This year, we're coming to you with, there are some minor amendments you'll see in the attachments, actually down to a misspelling from the municipal code, in the municipal code, to very minor nips and tucks, if you will. But we're also going to discuss tonight 6 what we consider substantive issues, and they're divided into 3 each. 3 of them are in the liveaboard section, that's 1718 in your attachment, that's 1718 of the municipal code, and the others in 1720.005, which is our slip assignment policy. A couple of quick notes on the discussion. I wanted to make this simple and straightforward because it can get complex when we start talking about codes and code sections and subsections and what have you. So we have 6 substantive issues I want to bring to you tonight. What I've done is I've divided them into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in the upper left-hand corner of the page. And on the upper right-hand corner of the page is the reference number in your attachment if you want to look directly to that and see what the track change language looks like. So this first item in the liveaboard section clarifies language that currently only requires a registered boat owner to have a liveaboard permit. And this really allows, the current language allows liveaboard privileges for unintended recipients of a liveaboard permit. In other words, the liveaboard permit is designed to be assigned to the permittee of the slip, not one of the many boat owners of the boat that may be in the slip. And so this proposed amendment protects slip permittees against unauthorized use that could jeopardize their own permit, like one of the boat owners going down there and doing, misbehaving, if you will. But even more importantly, it prevents like crashing on a friend's boat. Like if you're an owner of the boat, but you're not the liveaboard permittee. This maintains the integrity of the permit by requiring that it's the liveaboard permittee, not just the registered boat owner, which by definition would be the permittee would be one of the registered boat owners, but not just any boat owner would be the slip permittee to whom the liveaboard permit is issued would be the one who has the liveaboard privileges. This will help Harbor Patrol because the liveaboard boats have tags on the slip on the docks in front of the boats, and so we know where the liveaboard where liveaboard permitted vessels are. And that way, when Harbor Patrol is doing their rounds, they can tell who's supposed to be there and who isn't, and it really helps protect the entire harbor community. So this is an effort it's really about a clarification, changing it from registered boat owner to slip permittee. The second item is still in the liveaboard section. This section in 18030D regarding guests. This language currently allows a liveaboard 60 days per year for guest stays. Okay, the idea is I'm a liveaboard permittee and I have friends visiting from, Seattle, and it allows them to stay aboard for up to 60 days a year. It's been our administrative policy for years that the liveaboard permittee must be living aboard during those stays. The proposed amendment would codify that policy and in turn would help stem a trend of liveaboards allowing other folks, again, to just sleep on their boat. You have friends, I want to pick on Seattle, I don't know why that keeps coming to mind, but Portland, somewhere north. You have friends from Albuquerque who are in town and, hey, sure, stay on my boat. Not okay, right? The liveaboard permit and even the guest provision is intended to have the liveaboard permittee essentially be the chaperone, to be the responsible party, and be the one who is inhabiting or living on the boat while the guests are there. So this is just a small change that would codify our administrative policy that liveaboard permittee must live aboard during guest stays. The third and final one, it's in the liveaboard section, but it's actually an exemption that's in the liveaboard section in 171809OA. This is similar to the last item. The code allows 60 days a year for liveaboard privileges for a non-liveaboard slip permittee. So if you just have a boat in the harbor and you want to live on it for up to 60 days a year, vacation down there, and it happens often, this amendment would require the slip permittee exercising that vacation use privilege to live aboard during those times. Again, you don't take out your liveaboard, your vacation use privilege, you don't fill out that form and what have you, and then have your friends stay on the boat. This is all about providing opportunity and privilege for the slip permittees themselves. 60 days worth of liveaboard privileges basically, but it's designed for the slip permittees, not for not for their guests, quite frankly, or friends or what have you. Again, this would help prevent individuals from loaning or renting their vessels to others under the auspices of the vacation use privilege, right? Come on down, stay on my boat, pay me X amount, stay there for a month. I'll just take out a vacation use, permit. We'd like to not encourage that kind of behavior. And again, this will help Harbor Patrol in their activities. Discussion 4, now we're into the slip permit policies. I think we all know from our slip permit termination proceedings in the past that subrenting a slip permit is expressly forbidden under the marina rules and regulations that are attached and contained within a slip permit that the individual signs. By codifying the ban on subrents in 1720-005 will help clarify it for slip permittees right on the first page of the slip permit, so they know that subrenting is not. In other words, it'll take it from like the second or third page where it's in the marina rules and regulations, which are actually not part of they're not codified, they're not in the municipal code. It actually is in the mooring section, but that's another discussion. This would add it to the code and will also assist us in slip permit terminations. The few that we have of those where we can, it's right there in the code. The violation is XYZ. It would be under 1720-005B6. As you can see, we'd be adding that simple line at the end that said subrenting slips is not permitted. Next to last one, number 5, this proposed amendment in 005C1B II, if you will. This proposed amendment would clarify the requirement to place a vessel in a newly assigned slip within 90 days as part of accepting a slip permit offer. This reflects our long-standing administrative policy. The purpose, of course, is twofold. Number one, it completes the slip assignment process along with all the other requirements and obligations, measurements, photographs, MSD check, and what have you, operation, proof of operability. And it also promotes boating versus investing in a slip for anything other than boating. After we prepared the staff report for this, we were contacted by an individual who's a slip permittee in the harbor who said, wouldn't it not be wise to apply this to all the lists, all the waiting list, the master list, the submaster list, and the lottery list. And we're in agreement with that. And when we move up, I apologize, I would have had it in this report, but when we move up and start working with the city attorney, it would be our recommendation we include that language in all the slip permit language, all the slip permits that we have for waiting lists. So the final one, this proposed amendment that you'll find on page 18, this is interesting. You may remember this, those of you who've been on the commission for a while. Some time ago, we came to you when we were working on municipal code language relative to the lottery list, and we put in a requirement that anybody accepting an assignment from the lottery list, if they were a permittee in the harbor on another vessel, or if their spouse or legally registered domestic partner were a permittee on another boat in the harbor, that they would have to relinquish that permit in order to assume a permit from the lottery list. The reason and thinking being that the lottery list in particular is that list that's designed for people who haven't had a chance to have a slip permit in Santa Barbara Harbor. And it's counterintuitive to be offering those to people who already have a slip, and they would end up having 2 or even maybe more slips, The interesting thing about that is it was part of a previous ordinance, but a couple of years ago, the city clerk's office, working with a consultant, updated the municipal code. It was in an antiquated format, and they did a terrific job, honestly, of updating it into its current format, but we can't find this ordinance. And so what we intend to do with your permission, so that it isn't awkward at this stage and moving forward, is to get your approval/permission to move forward with an ordinance if it can't be found, if it can't be located, but we intend to work with the city clerk's office and the city attorney's office to try and locate that original ordinance. If we do, this discussion item number 6 would become moot. Okay, we just want to make sure it's in there because it's an important part of the lottery list assignment policy. So in conclusion/timeline, we believe these proposed amendments will codify existing administrative policies and practices, will provide clarity to boaters and liveaboards and slip permittees, and finally, they'll provide added harbor security because they'll make Harbor Patrol's job that much easier, and so they know who's on the boats or who's supposed to be on the boats and who's not. By way of timeline, obviously we're here tonight discussing this. We would anticipate going to, the next step actually is to begin work with the city attorney's office to put this in ordinance form. There's no doubt they're going to take some of this language that we as harbor managers have used and track changes to get the ideas onto paper, and they will probably rework some of the language so it's appropriate for ordinance consideration by the Ordinance Committee, which is a subcommittee of the City Council, and then ultimately by City Council. If there are any substantive changes to this, we will certainly bring it back to you, okay? But I can assure you there will be minor nips and tucks, as I mentioned before, but if there are, like I say, any changes to the intent or the substance of this, we'll be back here. We're not going to move through the process without alerting the commission to, or getting your approval to move forward with anything of substance that's changed. So the timeline stretched out a little bit for a couple of reasons. The city attorney's office has quite a workload, and we have to wedge our less than probably top priority interest into their work. They have a lot of stuff on their plate. And so I've given us a little wiggle room to get to the Ordinance Committee, and then pending their approval, we would expect to be at City Council in May or June. The ultimate goal is to get this in ordinance and in the municipal code before the end of the fiscal year. And that concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Crummon. Any questions? Commissioner Sloan.
Yeah, on that one about putting the boat in the slip within 90 days after getting the permit, I remember a number of years ago we had that presentation from that gentleman that came up with some alternative ways of measuring a boat because we got a number of different measurements and he went to a lot of effort. Is there a way that if something like that was going on that we would be able to extend it for those type of people, or did you think of the 90 days to include all of that? Because 90 days is a substantial period of time, I get that. So I was just wondering what your thinking was along those lines.
Commissioner Sloan, I understand your thinking and we're in line with it. If you're waiting on the wait list and God forbid a sole slip permittee passes away and all of a sudden your name comes up, you may not be prepared, right, to, oh my goodness, I have a 45-foot slip, I'll go buy a boat tomorrow, right? 90 days is a reasonable period of time, but even though it will be in the code, if individuals indicate to the department that they're looking, that they have a delivery skipper hired, that, any of the indications that show that they're not just sitting on the slip, we're happy to work with folks, always have, always will. So yeah, this is code, but there is some leeway built in that we will exercise, and I will work with the city attorney's office to ensure there is language in there that suggests that, as unless otherwise allowed by the waterfront director or his or her designee.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Commissioner Kramer.
Yeah, I have a basic question. Most of the city, and my basic question concerns enforcement, and most of the city is on basically a complaint-driven enforcement. How does it work in terms of the harbor and these new regulations?
Commissioner Kramer, I'll give you a dual answer, if you'll allow me. It is complaint-driven to a degree. That's where our liveaboards come in, are highly valued, let me say. We receive complaints from people who are liveaboards, business activity permit holders, the eyes and ears at the water line. At the same time, that's Harbor Patrol's job too. And so when Harbor Patrol officers witness illegal behavior, illegal situations and what have you, we initiate enforcement as well ourselves. So it's both. It comes from the citizenry and it comes from within the Waterfront Department.
Okay, but in terms of this specific one of who's living on the boat and renting and so forth, is the Harbor Patrol going to be tasked to go and inspect and so forth?
Not inside the boats. We don't go inside boats and inspect, but yes, to be able to. I got to be careful here because this, I don't want to. With all due respect, Commissioner Kramer, I don't want to. Explain our tactics for, finding out who's doing illegal things down there and not. But yes, Harbor Patrol's part of their mission, part of their job, part of their responsibilities are to make sure that people are abiding by the rules and obeying the law in the harbor. And these proposed code amendments are part of that.
Okay, great, thank you.
Sure.
And I have a question on another, and it's not really related, but it's part of this packet. And I was surprised to see it's 17.12.130, page 6 here. A certain craft requiring permit to cross main channel.
Just hold on a second. Let me catch up with you, Commissioner.
Yeah.
Page what?
Page 6, 17.12.130.
Okay, go ahead.
I was really surprised to read this, that no person shall operate any surfboard, etc., in or across the main channel or in any area of launching ramps, marinas, and turning basins without first having obtained permission from the waterfront director. That seems seems. I was very surprised to read that. Is that enforced?
Commissioner Kramer, yes, it is, because they get run over. It's a safety thing.
I appreciate the reasoning behind it, but it doesn't.
It is enforced. We stop surfers. We stop folks paddling across the harbor. Harbor Patrol does.
Okay.
And we escort them back to the dock, basically.
Okay, I see a lot doing it, but in any event, thank you. Stood out.
I wish we could see all of them, but we're there when we can be.
Okay.
Mr. Croman, I had one quick question on item 17.18.020, number 1 in your discussion. How many people do you believe this will affect? Making sure that the liveaboard permit is the boat slip permittee.
Commissioner Spicer, this is an item that comes up, an issue that comes up periodically when somebody living aboard is the registered owner and says, but I have a liveaboard permit. When the fact of the matter is, no, you don't have a liveaboard permit. Now, if the liveaboard permittee has you listed as added occupants, additional occupants, then you're legal to be on there. This is, it doesn't come up that often, but it comes up often enough where two things are of concern. Number one, people are crashing on boats where they shouldn't be. People do go down to boats and crawl through the canvas hatches and go to bed, right? Unbeknownst to the slip permittee or boat owner or what have you. And the other, gosh, I lost it for a sec here, but the other half of it is that if people are on the boats who aren't the registered slip permittee, they are misunderstanding the nature of the permit, and they're also jeopardizing the slip permittee's rights and privileges by being down there. We recently had a case of that where we had to move somebody off of a boat that was living on there and thought that this person had those rights and privileges. To your question, it doesn't happen often, but it happens often enough to be problematic. The key here is that Harbor Patrol, the waterfront department, the city, needs to know who's living on boats where there are liveaboard permits. That's the key. Okay, and adding additional occupants is at no extra cost, by the way. If you have a $150 liveaboard permit, you can add other occupants, but they need to be listed and registered with the Waterfront Department.
Very good. Commissioner Sly.
I'm still confused.
Okay.
Two people own a boat.
Yes, sir.
Can they be co-permittees so that
No.
either one of them could be? So one says, okay, I'll be the permittee.
Right.
The other owner says, fine, but for this period of time, I want to live on the boat.
Right.
Can't do it.
Yes, they can. But here's the hitch. If we only issue one liveaboard permit per slip, okay? But you can add, as I mentioned, other occupants. But the tricky part is the other occupant clause isn't for somebody to come and go casually and have, and live aboard for 5 days here or 2 weeks there, what have you. By definition, to be an additional occupant under that liveaboard permit, they have to live on that boat 51% of the time. Now, the easy way to do that is to use guest stay privileges, as we talked about before, up to 60 days a year. But to be on a liveaboard permit, either the permittee or listed as an additional occupant, you have to live aboard that boat. It has to be your principal residence, and you have to be on it over half the time in a year. That's always been that way.
So you're listed as an additional occupant.
Yes, sir.
You can be the liveaboard person even though the permittee is not living on the boat.
No, sir. The liveaboard permittee has to live on the boat.
That's the way I read it. But
Right. And the other occupant, if they're
I don't
in addition,
understand
the classic example is a family, right? I'm the slip permittee, and my son and daughter are listed as other occupants, and we all live on the boat together, right? So what's implied under additional occupants is that they are living aboard legally as well. It's just the fact that we issue one permittee. It's all under the umbrella of one permittee, and anybody listed as an additional occupant, right, has to be legitimately living there half the time. It has to be their principal residence, Commissioner.
So I own a boat with Joe.
Mm-hmm.
Joe is the permittee, and I decide I want to live on the boat
Mm-hmm.
because Joe just likes to go sail every now and then. He didn't want to spend much time there. I can't do that.
Joe's living aboard the boat, right?
No.
But why
No,
would Joe get a liveaboard
almost
permit
never
if he's
comes
not
down
living
there.
on
He
the
goes
boat?
sailing twice a month.
I must be misunderstanding, Commissioner. Joe has a liveaboard permit.
Nobody has a liveaboard permit.
Oh, nobody has a liveaboard permit.
Two owners, me and Joe.
Okay.
Joe is the slip permittee,
Okay.
but he's not that interested in the boat, and
Right.
I want to live on the boat,
Right.
but I'm not the slip permittee.
Right.
And so under your proposal, I can't do that.
That's correct.
It seems overly restrictive to me. But I don't understand why. I don't understand why that would be a problem for the harbor.
Because the only people who we issue or assign liveaboard permits are to slip permittees. We don't assign them to just registered owners of a boat that's in a slip. That's been pattern and practice. It's been administrative policy for a long time. There might be 10 owners on a boat, right? We're not issuing a liveaboard permit for all 10 of those people to live aboard.
Well, and you're not issuing a liveaboard permit for 9 of those 10, no matter who wants to live on the boat, right?
If
Only
one
the
of
one
them-
guy who's the permittee is qualified to get a liveaboard permit, as I understand it.
The slip permittee, if there's only one slip permittee, they're the only one qualified to get the permit. But they can list additional occupants under that who are granted those same rights and privileges as a liveaboard, as the permittee.
But in my example, Joe and I both have to live on the boat. If I want to live there, I can't do it unless Joe's living there also.
If Joe's the slip permittee, right?
Yes.
But he doesn't have a liveaboard permit, he would need to get a liveaboard permit and add you as an additional occupant for you to live on the boat.
But he would have to be there. He would also have to live on the boat,
Yes.
as I understand.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Commissioner Sloan.
So is the existing rules are that you have to be the slip permittee to get a liveaboard permit. Is that correct or incorrect?
Commissioner Sloan, that's correct.
Okay, so that's already the rules. We're just clarifying, who can be on board with the slip permittee.
We're clarifying the fact that the liveaboard permit is designated for the slip permittee, not anyone, as Commissioner Sly and I were just discussing, not just anyone who's a registered owner of the boat that's in the slip.
Okay, but the rules right now read that it can registered owner,
Yes, sir.
and so we're actually strengthening that.
Yes.
Okay.
Because we've had problems.
No,
Okay.
okay, very good. Oh, yes, John.
Yes, I have a question, Mick. Sure. Is this model that we're clarifying tonight, do other marinas, other harbors along the coast use the same model?
Commissioner Stedman, it's interesting. We are known as the Harbor of Exceptions. We have one of the most complex slip rental agreements in the country. I've been told that by esteemed maritime attorney from Rhode Island during a training a few years ago. All roads point back to the fact that demand wildly exceeds supply in Santa Barbara Harbor. So we have this entire municipal code, Title 17, is in one way or another related to the fact, whether it's living aboard or slip permits in particular, just having a slip permit in Santa Barbara Harbor. And all the nuances related thereto, all the gradations, all the gray area, all the little things, they all come back to that one common notion that demand wildly exceeds supply. And so where there are cracks in the code, where there are holes in the system, loopholes in the system, they are exploited. They get exploited to the point where there come times where we need to make very clear in the code itself what's allowed and what's not.
So the follow-up question on that, or the corollary, is what other marinas or harbors have situations where the demand wildly exceeds the supply?
I think we have the wildest, but similar situations exist in, I want to say, Monterey, Santa Cruz, possibly, Newport, but we haven't done a complete survey of all of those. I think that speaks to your question. In my experience in the Harbor Masters Association and on the board for 16 of my 19 years here, every harbor, all our harbors share some things in common, right? Like our environmental policies and what have you.
Undaria.
I'm sorry?
Undaria, apparently.
Yeah, exactly. But we all have these eccentric, right, little differences that are reflections of the uniqueness of the harbors that we manage. And I think this is true here in some of the areas we're discussing tonight. And in general, when I come to you every year with code amendments, they often reflect small differences and what have you. For example, Commissioner Yanif has been communicating with us. I think we're going to meet next week on issues regarding our outriggers on West Beach, racks and clubs and individual outriggers and sailboats and rowing dories and this and that. That's unique to here. Newport's got its own unique version of that and what have you. And these sort of, like I said, eccentricities find their way into almost every level of code policy and programmatic work we do.
I just wondered if we were, draconian in our overarching policy, or if this was sort of, normal for most.
This is actually, much of what you heard tonight is codifying what's been basic administratively advanced policy for many years. So it's really not inventing the wheel in terms of that. It's just getting into code, into law, which has been administered at the front counter for many years.
Understood.
Commissioner Sloan.
No, I just know that we have they've asked for a recommendation.
That's my next question. Mr. Croman, are you asking us to vote and recommend these?
Mr. Chair, yes, as Emily said, we're asking you that you receive this report and recommend adoption of these amendments to City Council.
Okay. Well, with that, it would require a motion.
So moved.
A second.
And a second. We have both. Okay. Unless there's any other questions or discussions. Do you have? You're going to call for the vote? Yes. Yeah. At that point, I will call for vote. We have a first and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
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 And a nay vote from me.
And one nay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Croman. Commissioners, I appreciate the discussion. We are on to item number 8, budget overview. Emily, can you fill us in?
Yes. Budget overview for fiscal year 2020 and fiscal year 2021. Recommendation that the Harbor Commission receive a report on the status of fiscal years 2020 and 2021 waterfront operating and capital budget. And B, provide comments on the various components of the draft budget proposal.
Mr. Bossy, welcome back.
It's good to be back, Mr. Chair. Thanks for having me. This, as Emily just mentioned, is a budget overview for fiscal years 20 and 21. So, as I stated earlier, we're looking forward. And just to let you know, as an overview, these numbers are still being developed. Some of our proposed fees are still being talked about and developed, and we recently discussed these, as I'll mention later, with our city administrator as well as our finance department. So just think of this as a fluid document. The numbers you see when I come back next month with the formal recommendation will likely be a little bit different. I don't anticipate any major changes, but just to let you know, that's where we're coming from. We met with Again, we met with the Harbor Commission's Budget Subcommittee last week and went over a lot of these numbers. And as I just said, we'll be back next month with a more formal recommendation. So jumping right into it, our presentation outline, I'm going to review our proposed FY 2020 fees and then the revenue assumptions that go along with those fees. And I'll do the same for fiscal year 2021. And then I'll look at our fiscal year 20 and 21 proposed expenditures and then our capital program. So as far as our fee adjustments for 2020, we're looking at a slip rental fee, a 2% increase, which we've been doing for many years. And the impact there, you say, what's a 2% increase? On a 25-foot slip, that's about $5 a month. We're looking to increase our slip transfer fee, $25 per foot. That would bring it to $500 even. I should let you know that that does not include the 20, 25, 28, 30, as well as designated commercial fishing berths, where those, all those different lengths have been frozen at different levels throughout the years. We also are proposing a West Beach rack permit increase of $100. That would go from $1,100 per rack to $1,200.
Chair Spicer and Commissioners, we are going to institute a slip electrical submetering program. I'll be reporting out on this next month in detail, but it is a fee that will be included in our fee resolution, a rate. But as I mentioned, I'll have more details next month.
Thank you.
Based on those fees that do play a role in our revenue assumptions, here's what we're looking at as far as 2020. So again, you've seen these before. On the left is our 4 revenue categories. The next column is our fiscal year 19 budget, our fiscal year 19 projection, and then what we're proposing for fiscal year 20. So we really get down into the details and analyze everything that's going on and around the harbor and the waterfront. As far as property management, we're proposing a 2.5% increase in our revenues. We've seen some of our restaurants kind of level off, but again, our commercial and retail seem to be going strong. Again, this weather isn't helping, but we're hoping to see a strong spring, and obviously our busy time of the year is July, August, and September. As far as financial management, these numbers are provided by our finance department, and they have proposed 5.4% increase as far as our interest revenue. Our parking services, that's a nice robust jump there, 6.4%. Reason for that is primarily based on the opening, or I should say reopening, of the Cabrillo West lot. So that's the larger lot next to the Cabrillo Pavilion. That is scheduled to be completely open by June 1st, so we'll be able to get that summer traffic again. Real quickly, I want to jump back up to the property management. That 2.5% increase, that basically is $150,000 of that, which is just over that increase, is due to an increase in our cruise ships. The last 2 years, we have been budgeted for appropriately a reduction in the number of cruise ships. They were doing a global repositioning. There were some consolidations of the the cruise lines. And so we had expected and planned for a reduction in the number of cruise ships. So far for fiscal year 20, we're looking at, I believe, 28 cruise ships. It might be 29. So back up to our more standard level, and so that's where that additional $150,000 comes in. Moving back down to marina management, we see continued strong numbers again from our slip permit transfer fees. We have that pegged at right about $1 million for fiscal year 20, which is similar to where we think we'll end up this year. Our proposed fiscal year 2021 fee adjustments, these may look similar to what you just saw. 2% increase in our slip rental, $25 per foot increase in our slip transfer fee, and then again, a $100 increase in our West Beach rack permit, which moves that up to $1,300 per rack. Based on that, our 2021 revenue assumptions, you'll see our proposed fiscal year 2020, and then what we're proposing for 2021, and then how that measures out in a percentage basis. Property management, slight increases. Again, still hoping to have the cruise ships at about the same level as fiscal year 20. Our financial management actually goes down a little bit, a few $1,000s. Our parking services, we're looking after that boost with Cabrillo West to kind of settle out a little bit, but we are proposing a 2.5% increase there. We continue to see strong sales in our waterfront parking permits. That's a big driver in parking. That's kind of funny I said that. A big driver in parking, sorry. And then we've got marina management, again, holding steady with 1.6%. So overall, about a 1.4% increase going from fiscal year 20 to 21. Sorry, a lot of numbers here, but this gets you to our expenditures. And you'll see here, overall, down in the bottom right-hand corner, going from 19 to 20, you'll see overall a 2% increase in expenditures, and going from 20 to 21, a 3% increase. You'll see salaries and benefits increase in both years. That's due to existing labor agreements and the various represented employee groups of the Waterfront Department, and then also what's being talked about as far as those new labor agreements. Benefits go up as well to the tune of 6% in each year. Our allocated costs, those are costs provided to us by city administration. Those are spread out to all the different departments, and those are scheduled to increase 3% in both years. And those are primarily due to things, increased liability insurance, as well as overhead allocations that again are spread throughout the departments. Our supplies and services remain relatively steady, going from 19 to 20. They bump up a little in 21. This category is things like where we purchase new parking radios. We have a huge parking staff. Those folks are out and about all the time. They have very dated radios at the current time, so we plan on slowly getting them new radios. We have Harbor Patrol costs, things like ammunition. A few years ago, we had them replace their SCBA, their self-contained breathing apparatus equipment, fire equipment, and things like that. And then this also includes training for all the different divisions, including Harbor Patrol officers, as well as an increase to our Work Inc. contract. Those are the folks that are down in the harbor who do a wonderful job for us 365 days a year. They've been there, I think, 25 years now, so they're very much a part of our community. And the increases with their contract is due to the state-mandated minimum wage increases. It keeps popping up about $1 a year. Our special projects and community promotions go up 4% and then 3%. These are things like our lifeguard services that we help pay for, as well as the shuttle bus contract, our July 4th and Parade of Lights fireworks. So that's where that all resides. And then our non-capitalized costs, those are kind of your smaller equipment costs. So for the increase you'll see in going from 19 to 20, what stands out is 44%. That's about a $55,000 increase, and that is due in both those years, in 20 and 21. We are going to be replacing our ski data system at Harbor Main as well as the wharf. That's the entry gates and the license plate recognition program. They're becoming a little dated and obsolete, so we got to upgrade those. So we'll take one of those each year. Our principal and interest, our principal goes up in both years. That's because we've moved again with at least one of our loans is from a 30-year payback to a 20-year. And so consequently, you'll see a little bit of a decrease in the interest rate. So an increase in the principal and then a decrease in the interest. As far as our capital program, we fund our capital projects through surplus revenue and reserves above policy, as well as our capital reserve, which is also known as our Harbor Preservation Fund.
We took the capital program to the commission in November. Just a couple things of note here. Updating the security camera system. We're going to look to Department of Homeland Security for a grant for that. They should be opening up the grant program here in the next couple months. And the biggest project of note is replacing the ice house. Proposals for engineering are due tomorrow. Haven't had a lot of interest or a lot of inquiries, so I'm a little nervous about what we're going to get, but we'll keep pursuing that. It's time to replace that. One item not on here is we're going to do an interior remodel of our offices, replacing some furniture, painting, and carpet. It's kind of expensive. It's about $100,000, so we'd like to include that in the FY 2020 capital program, and that's what we'll be taking to council. I didn't have the cost estimates back in November and was not able to introduce that project to the commission at that time. Next. And in 2021, I went over these again. The most significant project of note is replacing those lift stations on Stearns Wharf. We have some preliminary plans for that, looking to possibly replace that type of system, going from a pneumatic system to an electronic trash pump type system. It's 30 years old plus, and it's a kind of system that cannot fail under any circumstances, so we want to get ahead of that and make sure it's a robust and reliable system. I'd be happy to answer any questions about specific projects. I think I covered most of those back in November, so I just wanted to cover the highlights.
Thank you.
As we look out to where we're at in the budget process, actually, before I get into that, I would be remiss to not mention the fact that the development of this budget, our budget subcommittee has seen this. They are involved in that. We have a lot of staff. Every different division participates in this. We get together with each division and the supervisor and the manager, supervisors and the manager, and go through every budget line by line. We do that in December and January, so we really come through this. Everybody puts in a lot of effort. I'm just the lucky guy who gets to come and present it to you. But these folks put in a lot of effort. Damien Goodall is our accounting guru, and he does an amazing job, and I can't thank him enough. So as we move forward, just know that everybody's involved in this. We met with the subcommittee up here on the 13th. That was last week. We actually had our city administrator review yesterday. That's where we met with the city administrator as well as the finance department. We were the first meeting of the year. We were the first department to scheduled to turn in our budget. So, and everybody else's will trickle in over time. We're here tonight with you for the overview, and then we'll bring back the recommendation next month. Again, some of these numbers might change. I don't anticipate huge changes. We have a to-be-determined date to go before our City Finance Committee. Our council budget work session is scheduled for the 6th of May, and then the big city budget, which we are obviously a part of, is scheduled to be adopted on June the 18th. So that's a lot of information, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Realize that you'll have another bite at the apple next month. And again, 2-year budget, and we'll again have time to tweak it if we need to this time next year. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bossi. Any questions? How did the subcommittee Any notes during your meeting, the budget subcommittee meeting?
No, I think Brian did a pretty good job of covering everything that we kind of talked about. I don't remember anything, do you?
No.
Yes?
I would say very good job. Both-
Yeah.
A very good job as opposed to a pretty good job.
And we're not surprised that you were the first department to turn in your budget.
Did you get comments back from Paul on this?
The meeting went really well. There weren't a whole lot of comments. One of the things we are still kind of dealing with are our fees. And Carl did a really good job explaining the sub-metering program. So we're still kind of, that's why I said this, the fees and things are still kind of dynamic.
Right,
We're trying to figure some things out as to how we do that. Obviously, we've done the 2% slip fee for a number of years now. The electrical submarine throws in a different kind of wrench into the program that is very much needed.
Right.
So we're still trying to figure some of those things out. But outside of that, it was a good meeting. We got a lot of positive feedback. We work, through this whole process. It's not like they show up and it's the first time they've seen. We work very closely with our finance department.
Right.
Our budget liaison this year is Bob Samario, the director. So that's very helpful. So we end up on the same page.
And so at next month's meeting, we'll see kind of what we would consider a final draft of this for recommendation. And along those lines, there will be some revenue in there for what Carl's going to present on the electrical metering as well.
That will be part of our job over the next month, yes. And yes, it will come back to you in a recommendation form.
So that'll dovetail into whatever implementation schedule we talk about.
Correct. I would anticipate Carl would give a report, his separate report,
Right.
and then we would move into a budget report sometime later in that meeting.
And that was one of the things we heard at the budget subcommittee was the work that Carl and everybody had done on putting meters on the individual slips over the last 9 years or so, so that we can start individually metering the electricity used by each vessel.
Great,
So-
great. I look forward to that.
Thank you.
I had one question down in the weeds. It looked to me that the West Beach rack permits were going up at a much higher rate than just about everything else. $200 over 2 years.
Chair Spicer, that is correct. That's what we're proposing. So right now, this is our thought process with that. We have 6 racks out there. They're generally used by the various clubs. On each of those racks, there are slots for 8 outriggers, kayaks, etc. So right now, the cost is $1,100 for that one rack, 8 racks, or 8 spots in there. Now, if you just have your own outrigger and you're not part of a club and you just say, hey, I want to go down there and put my outrigger down on the beach, that will cost you $275. So that's much more expensive than the rack price. It's a buy in bulk, I guess is what you could call it. So we're trying to start to even that slowly, incrementally even that out. In order to do that, the rack permit would have to be $2,200 a year. So we're slowly getting to that point, but it's going to take a little while. We feel that the $100, it's sufficient. It's slow, but it's not too painful for the various clubs to take in. Yeah,
I understand the logic. I guess it kind of goes back also to Mr. Cronman's point of supply and demand. So.
Very much so.
Okay, thank you. Shohan, did you have a question?
Yeah, I do. Sorry, Mr. Boss, I got a question about that. So the club racks, that's not for, let's say if I were an individual, I couldn't go to a club and say, could I put my canoe on the club rack? You have to be a member of the club in order to be able to have access to that club rack.
Chair Spicer, Commissioner Yaniv, these racks, I believe what we're talking about is for monohull boats, right? We have the ones that you just set on the beach behind the seashells, and then for $250 a year, $275 a year, and then we have racks associated with those, and there was this huge disparity in the cost when they first went in. We've been trying to catch up.
Okay, so I just want to make sure then that it's not for the outrigger clubs and their 8,
Subleasing?
yeah, or the eight boat racks that clubs have, like Kanaya and Ocean Club and Uhani and Santa Barbara Outrigger, that they have their racks, and those permit fees aren't going to go up.
The commissioner said, "Man, those are the ones that are going up."
So then, why? Why do they have to go up?
Back to, if you'll allow me, Commissioner Stedman, back to what Mr. Bossi was saying. If you have 8 spots on a rack, and some of them have surf skis on them and all manner of craft, we don't really monitor who they give those spots to on their racks. That's their business, basically. But the per craft price, if you're going to put it on the beach, as Brian described, is $275.
Yeah.
A rack price at $1,100 or $1,200 is a considerable savings at 8 times X, which isn't anywhere near $275 at this point. And so that's why incrementally the rack prices are going up, because all the racks are associated with club organizations.
Okay. Well, okay. I guess my how I see it is all the clubs that are down there, they're all nonprofits. They're not for-profit institutions, and I don't really feel that raising the rate on that would really justify anything, because they're not there to make any money off of it, and it's just individuals that are there to, that are recreating and enjoying the sport itself, and it makes it easier for them storing their craft down on the water rather than having to, transport it from their home every time they want to go out and paddle or surf ski or whatever. I don't feel something like that should be turned into a money-making venture.
Let me interrupt real quick. Commissioner, you are a member of one of the clubs, is that correct?
That is correct, yeah.
Okay, so I appreciate your passion, but I think it's probably appropriate not to
Sure.
push policy at this point.
Okay.
Please forgive me for
Sure.
jumping in, so. Okay. Are there any other questions for Mr. Bossi and the crew? Okay, with that, I believe we have seen and commented on the budget. Is that all you required tonight, Mr. Bossi?
That is all we require. And thank you for the comments. I appreciate it. And as always, if you think of something later or you want to talk about something, feel free to give any one of us a call or an email
Okay. And
at
that
any
might
time.
be your forum there. So. All right, well, thank you. We are at the commission staff communication. Anything on your side, Mr. Reedman?
Chair Spicer, I did go to council staff budget work session this afternoon from 1 o'clock to 5 o'clock, and with all the mayor and council and city administration, finance staff, and all the department heads as a kickoff to the budget season. And we talked about kind of like this: projections, proposed changes in fees, and then goals for the upcoming 2-year cycle. And actually, we didn't focus so much on capital projects. Most of that money's going into streets at this point. But we did talk about policy work and policy implementation, such as this electrical sub-meter installation, because we're going to roll this out, well, I guess we just did, and we'll roll it out more thoroughly next month. But so things like that, we'll be reporting out onto the council so they understand what we're doing down there.
Very good. Thank you. Anything from Commissioner Kramer?
Yeah. We met, the Sea Level Rise Committee met on January 22nd and talked about various possible adaptations, strategies or ideas, concepts. There's unfortunately not on the city website. I looked today. No minutes of that meeting or probably of any of the meetings. I think I'm going to ask if they'll be there. The next meeting will be on March 12th, and that's a public meeting. So that's the only thing, unless Jim has anything more to say.
No, I think that was a good summary. Thank you.
Okay, very good. I had one small housekeeping item. Ms. Galarte has showed me a format for the agendas, and I just wanted all the commissioners to be prepared for next month for a different look to the agenda and the packets. So,
Look forward to it.
Commissioner Kramer has a preview there. So with that, then if there's nothing else, I'd call for an adjournment. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Thank you. We are adjourned.
Wanna start anew, throw in your hand, break up the band, start a new life, be a new man. But for all we know, we might still have a way to go. Before you go, there's something you